بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم إننا نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن نفس لا تشبع ومن دعوة لا يستجاب لها. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. حياكم الله وبياكم أحبتي في الله to another class in studying Islamic knowledge. Today, بإذن ta'ala, we will conduct a one-day commentary, reading and going over the famous poem known as al-Jazariyyah, المقدمة al-Jazariyyah, in the science of Tajwid. Why should we study this text? Why should we spend our time in understanding its contents when there's so many other topics we could be learning about? The reason why we learn about Tajweed, Ikhwani wa Akhawat, is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to. Allah says in the Quran, أَوْ زِدَ عَلَيْهِ وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to recite the Quran with tartil. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, the great Sahabi, the fourth Khalifa in Islam, when he was asked about this verse, he was asked to explain the meaning of at-tartil. And he said, radiyallahu anhu, that at-tartilu tajweedul huruf wa ma'rifatul wuquf. At-tartilu tajweedul huruf wa ma'rifatul wuquf. At-tartil is to tajweed al-huruf, yani to pronounce the letters in the most perfect fashion, yani with tajweed, just as it was revealed and taught by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and which he taught to his companions, and the companions taught to the tabi'een, and the tabi'een taught the atba' tabi'een up until it reached us today. And also to know the places of stopping, where to stop, where to begin in the ayat. And this is learned through the science of Tajweed. So we learn Tajweed because Allah Azza wa Jalla, first off, commands us. And know for sure that whenever you fulfill a commandment of Allah, then you are rewarded for doing so. Subhanallah bihamdi. That this becomes a means of obtaining hasanat. Every moment you spend in the classes of Tajweed, learning how to recite the Quran, know that there are hasanat. And there are many hasanat of various virtues explained through the Quran and Sunnah. So this is why we spend time learning about Tajweed. Also, we see that Tajweed, ikhwani akhawat, because there's some people who have a doubt. They say, how do we know Tajweed exists? Naam. We know that Tajweed exists, one, because of this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to recite the Quran with tartil. And we explain tartil via the statement of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Also, when you take a look at the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you see that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ recited the Quran with tajweed. One time, Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, the servant of the Messenger, the one who served him as a young boy for 10 years at least, radiallahu anhu, he was asked, كيف كانت قراءة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم? How was the recital of the Prophet of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم? He was asked to describe it. And Anas ibn Malik, he said, كانت مدا مدا. That the Prophet of Allah ﷺ would recite elongating, taking his time, not in a rush manner. ثم قرأ, then he recited, giving them an example. When he recited the Basmala, the Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, يمد بسم الله ويمد الرحمن ويمد الرحيم. He gave an example of how the Prophet of Allah ﷺ would extend his recital of this phrase. This shows that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ did not recite the Quran regularly, like how we speak in regular conversation. He did not read the Quran or say the Quran just like how he would normally talk. Rather, he would apply rules of tajweed to it. This is another evidence to show that tajweed is found in our Sharia. Another reason why we study the science of tajweed is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَأَنصِتُوا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. Allah says that when the Quran is recited, then you should listen attentively. Not just listen, but listen attentively and remain silent so that we may obtain His mercy. Allah Azza wa Jalla commands us to what? Listen attentively. Not only in understanding its meanings, but also to hear how it is recited, to listen and hear and know how it is recited. Also, the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, he says in a hadith that خَيْرُكُم مَّن تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. The best of you are those who learn the Quran and teach it to others. The best of you are those who learn the Quran both in recital as well as its meanings and teaches it to others. Naam. If the Quran did not have tajweed, then we would not need to learn how to recite it. But because the Prophet of Allah said, خَيْرُكُم مَّن تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ, the best of you are those who learn the Quran, and that includes what? Learning how to recite it. This shows that tajweed exists in the Quran. Everyone with me so far? Is it clear? This is a doubt some are afflicted with. And we have to understand that it has no basis. And rather, it's from the whispers of shaitan. And we seek refuge from the whispers of shaitan and his armies. Ameen. Now, so these texts, ikhwani akhawat, and others, they show not only the existence of tajweed, but also the importance of learning tajweed, learning the Quran and reciting it properly. However, we should understand, and I want to highlight this is very important, learning the Quran is not restricted only to recital. Rather, it includes recital and understanding its meanings and putting it into practice. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not reveal the Quran just to be recited, just to be recorded, but rather to be understood and to be reflected over. Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka mubarakun liyadabbaru ayatihi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Quran as a blessed book which he revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. For what purpose? For the people to reflect over its meanings. This is the purpose of the Quran, ikhwani akhwa. And this is when it becomes mubarak for an individual. It becomes a source of barakah for them. This is when the Quran becomes a hujjah, a proof for that individual, when they understand its meanings and they put it into practice in the proper manner. How do you put the Quran into practice in the proper manner? By learning the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in charge of not only conveying the Quran, but also explaining its meanings. لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. That the Quran, Allah Azza wa sent down the dhikr to him in order for him to clarify the Quran to them in 23 years. In 23 years. So we have to couple these two things together, ikhwani akhawat. Just as we are diligent in perfecting our recital of the Quran, we have to be as diligent, if not more diligent, in practicing the Quran and teaching it and spreading it to others with the proper understanding. Why is that? Because the Prophet of Allah warned us against simply reciting the Quran and not implementing it or understanding it correctly and putting it into practice correctly. And he gave an example of a people, of a qawm, of a nation, of a sect who will come in his ummah and they perfect their recital, but their actions do not reflect the meanings of what they recite. And anyone knows what sect this is, which the Prophet of Allah warned us against? The Khawarij, Ahsantum, Sheikh Ali, Shimpur, Adib, everyone, Salim, Naam, Abdul Salam, Ahsantum, Barakallahu fikum. In an authentic hadith collected by Abu Dawood, the Prophet, narrated by Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, the Prophet of Allah, he said, سَيَكُونُ فِي أُمَّتِي اِخْتِلَافٌ وَفُرْقَةٌ. Subhanallah. That there will be in my nation division and sectarianism. The Messenger of Allah told us that there will be division in this ummah, and that from this division, from these sects, will be قَوْمٌ يُحْسِنُونَ الْقِيلَ وَيُسِيئُونَ الْفِعْلَ. Allahu Akbar. The Prophet of Allah said that there will come a people with beautiful words. They perfect their recital of the Quran and their speech. Their speeches are emotional, and it has reached the highest level of balagha, of eloquence. And when you listen to them, subhanAllah, your hearts tremble. They're perfect. They perfected the recital of the Quran in their speeches. However, وَيُسِيئُونَ الْفِعْلَ, and they do evil deeds. Their actions are completely different. وَيَذُ بِاللَّهِ. May Allah protect us. يَقْرَؤُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, they recite the Quran. لَا يُجَاوِزُ تَرَاقِيَهُمْ يَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ مُرُوقَ السَّهْمِ مِنَ الرَّمِيَّةِ. They recite the Quran with this perfection, but it does not go past beyond their throats. It will not go past beyond their throats, meaning it doesn't reach their heart so that it can affect them and so that they can use their intellect and practice it the proper way as it was revealed. these people who perfect their recital, but their actions do not match, they will leave the deen as an arrow leaves its target, and they will not return back to the target. لا يرجعون حتى يرتد على فوقه. They will not return back to the target, to the deen, yani just as the arrow does not return back to its bow. Subhanallah. This method, this example that the Prophet of Allah gave us is from the eloquence of the Prophet is that he was given something in the that he was given something called comprehensive speech. He was able to use few words which contains a lot of meanings. And in this simile that he draws for us is beautiful lessons. One, the Messenger of Allah, he likens the Khawarij to an arrow. Why does he liken the Khawarij to an arrow? You take a look at an arrow, ikhwani akhawat. It has to be completely straight. It has to be free of defects. Any type of defect in the arrow, what will happen to the arrow? Can you use it? It will impact the accuracy of the arrow. Sah? You're shooting one way and it'll go another way. The Khawarij, they've reached a level of perfection in their recital. However, did that benefit them, ikhwani akhawat? The Prophet of Allah said, لا يجاوز تراقيهم. It did not go past their throats. Showing what? That simply perfecting your recital is not sufficient in our deen. So first of all, do not be amazed by those who are qurra, who are masters in recital, if their actions do not follow suit. If their actions are not upon what the Sahaba were upon, radiallahu anhum, the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they are the mi'yar. This is the establishing factor that determines one goes to paradise or not. فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. So if they believe just as you believe, O Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, then they are guided. This is the determining factor as to who is upon guidance and who is upon misguidance. Whether they perfect their recital or not. If they're upon the understanding of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the Salaf of this ummah, just as they were taught by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, then they are guided. And anyone who perfects the recital of the Quran but opposes their way, then they are considered to be misguided. No matter how eloquent they are in their recital, no matter how perfect they are in their recital, no matter how beautiful they are in their recital of the Quran. Do not be deceived by this, ikhwani akhawat. This is another tanbih, another warning and trick that shaitan uses to misguide the servants. He beautifies in the minds of people the recital of a qari, while that same qari has filthy beliefs about Allah Azza wa Jalla, about the Prophet of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, about the Sahaba themselves, radiallahu anhum. Therefore, beware of this, ikhwani akhwat. This is a warning from the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam described the Khawarij, hum sharrul khalqi wal khaliqa. Subhanallah, they are the worst of creation. They perfected recital of the Quran, but yet he described them as being what? Sharrul khalqi wal khaliqa. Subhanallah. Tuba liman qatalahum wa qataluhu. Subhanallah. Glad tidings to those who fight them and kill them. Subhanallah. This is the Messenger of Allah speaking. These people perfected the recital of the Quran, but their actions prove otherwise. طيب? So do not be deceived by people's recital. Rather, hold firm. تمسك بحبل الله واتبع الهدى. Hold firm to the rope of Allah and follow the guidance, the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how you will be led to Jannah bi'idhni ta'ala. And this is the ultimate goal, ikhwani akhawat. Yani, the reason why we spend our time learning these texts, learning tajweed, reciting the Quran, we sacrifice our sleep, we sacrifice eating food and fasting during the day to recite the Quran for what purpose? To enter Jannah. So look at how you can enter Jannah and stick to those paths. Stick to those paths as explained by the Prophet ﷺ in his sunnah. Now, طيب, is that clear first and foremost? This is very important for us to understand. Before we go into tajweed, we go into the poem, this is extremely important to understand because this is the basis of everything, right? Why waste your life engaged in an affair and you're doing it wrong? The whole purpose of being on this earth is to what? Worship Allah in the correct manner. طيب? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all al-firdaus al-a'la bighayri hisab wa la adhab. With that being said, alhamdulillah, today we will study al-Jazariyyah. And al-Jazariyyah is a poem written by the great scholar Abu al-Khair Muhammad bin Muhammad al-Jazari al-Shafi'i. And al-Jazari, this is an ascription. This is known as a nisbah in the Arabic language. People in the past, even in Arabs today, they ascribe people to their land. Okay, even us, yani non-Arabs, people are ascribed to their lands. And as a result, they're given this nisbah. So he's known as al-Jazari because he was born, or he's ascribed to Jaziratul Umar. طيب. He was born in Damascus, Syria, in the year 751 during the month of Ramadan. Allahu Akbar. And he died in Shiraz in the year 833 after Hijrah at the age of 82. This great Imam al-Muqri'in during his time, he was considered to be the masters of the recital of the Quran during his time. People would travel to him, and he would travel throughout the Islamic lands at that time, and people would travel to learn from him because of the vast knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him. He authored in many fields, many works, over 60 works he has, and most of them were in the science of tajweed and qira'at. Ibn al-Jazari, for those who are not familiar, he is like al-Hafiz ibn Hajar in hadith. He, in the science of tajweed and qira'at, his status is like al-Hafiz ibn Hajar. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar in hadith, the master, he is considered to be an expert. When he says something, khalas, that's it. Right? That's like the determining factor, a ruling. طيب. Likewise, Ibn Jazari, his status is like that, to give you a comparison of his level in this science. And he has over 60 works, and most of them were in tajweed and al-qira'at. From these works is Tahbir al-Taysir fi al-Qira'at al-Thalath. From them is Munjir al-Muqri'in. From them Jami' al-Bayan. From them is al-Nashr. From them is al-Tamheed fi ilm al-Tajweed. And he has many other books. And among those books is what we have in front of us is المقدمة الجزرية. And there's two ways you can pronounce it. You can say المقدمة or المقدمة. طيب, both of them permissible, and they differ in their meaning slightly. طيب. Scholars throughout centuries after this great Imam rahimahullah, he made this poem. Scholars from his time up until now, throughout these centuries, right? We said, what year did he die? Anyone recall? If you're paying attention, what year did Imam Ibn al-Jazari rahimahullah ta'ala die? 833. Ahsantum. Naam. These are certain points you have to memorize, right? You learn what this Imam wrote for you, what he summarized for you. At the very least, learn his name, learn when he died, learn when he was born, right? Where he was born, where he died, and make dua for him. This is the least we can do. Make dua for him, rahimahullah. Now, when he authored this or composed this poem, for centuries, subhanAllah bihamdi, scholars gave considerable attention to it, and they memorized it, and they understood it, and they taught it, and they even wrote explanations for it. And whenever you find that scholars give such importance to a work to a point where they memorize it and they teach it and they write explanations, okay, they quote unquote service that book, then know for sure that this is the type of book that you should spend your time on and memorize it and commit it to memory and understand it and review it often. Okay, this is the methodology in studying. That a book in a science, you don't just take any obscure book in a science written by any scholar. Rather, you take those books that are serviced by the people of knowledge, that are taught, that are memorized, all right? And those are the books you commit to memory. And then after that, okay, you can look at other books, but you have a foundation in that which the people of knowledge give attention to first and foremost. All right. And the reason for that is because the barakah in it, it's a sign that Allah Azza wa Jalla accepted that work, that He placed barakah in that work, and the importance of the work, the contents of the work are extremely beneficial for the beginner students of knowledge. طيب. Examples of explanations. A couple of brothers asked about some explanations for this work. Like I said, there are many explanations for this work. Among the most important is al-Daqa'iq al-Muhakkamah by Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. He has a book called al-Daqa'iq al-Muhakkamah. This is a book taught to us by our Mashaykh. A very important explanation of this poem. Also, you have al-Minah al-Fikriyah by Mullah Ali al-Qari al-Hanafi. Also, you have a book more contemporary, Fathu Rabb al-Bariyah by Safwat. Also, you have, of course, Ghanim Quduri al-Hamad. It's a book by Markaz or Mahad al-Shatibi in Jeddah. Those are just a few different explanations, but as it relates to every science generally, you have to learn this science directly from its people, from the people of the science. And it does not suffice learning this poem simply by reading a book. All right. This is the case with all Islamic knowledge and specifically Tajweed, because Tajweed, of course, it requires pronouncing, reading, right? You have to read the Quran, and you can only read properly when you learn it directly from a Quran teacher. طيب? But with that being said, these explanations are beneficial, as a secondary source. But your primary source is going to be your Quran teacher. Is this clear? Now, before we begin with the contents of the poem, like I said, or I made an announcement in the channel, this type of class is Majlis Sama. I hope everyone listened to the video. I'm not going to go over the points again, but I just want to highlight that it's only going to be a commentary. It's not an explanation, meaning that we're not going to explain every single point in the book, rather only highlight certain points. And then you go to an explanation course and you get more details. This class is only 1 hour. And the intent of it is to simply listen, read the whole entire poem and transmit the Ijazah. However, with that being said, we do want to provide some beneficial commentary regarding certain selected portions. So before we start reading, I would like to give an overview of this poem, which will help you in understanding it, get an overall view and a better understanding of the contents therein. If we were to take the entire poem, how many lines are there? Anyone knows how many lines are in this poem? And this is a method that you should try with every book you study. Okay, not just this one, but any book that you study. 107. طيب. Excellent. If we take these 107 lines, we can divide it into 4 major sections. 4 major sections. The first section is from line 1 to 40. And in these first 40 lines, we have 5 subcategories or subtopics. All right. The first being the introduction, which is lines 1 through 8. The second being makharijul huruf, points of articulation of the letters. And this is from lines 9 through 19. The third is the characteristics of the letters, sifatul huruf. And this is from lines 20 to 26. The fourth being tajweed from lines 27 to 33. And then you have at-tarqiqat, rules related to tarqiq, or in some nusakh it's written at-tanbihat, some points that you must pay a close attention to. And this is from lines 34 to 40. So these 5 topics, introduction, makharij al-huruf, sifat al-huruf, at-tajweed, at-tanbihat, or at-tarqiqat, these 5 subjects are found under lines 1 through 40. Excuse me. Bismillah. Now, and if there's anything that you want to be repeated, then the best thing you can do is ask in the chat and your classmates can help you out. Or you return back to the recording, just for the sake of time. Just for the sake of time, because this is only a commentary. طيب. Section 2, lines 41 to 64. It contains 4 major topics. The first dealing with ar-ra'at, rules related to the letter ra, and this is from lines 41 to 43. Then you have lamat, okay, rulings related to the lam, and other various rulings, mutafarriqa from lines 44 to 51. Then you have rules related to the dad and the dha, lines 52 to 61. And then you have the noon and meme with shadda and meme sakina. This is lines 62 to 64. And these 4 topics makes up the second section of this poem. All right? So 41 to 64 deals with the second section. The third section is from lines 65 to 100. 65 to 100. And this has 4 topics in it. One, you have nun sakina and tanween. Nun sakina and tanween. 65 to 68. Secondly, you have rulings related to al-mad, the lengthening, when to lengthen in its various types. Lines 69 to 72. Then you have a topic related to al-waqfu wal-ibtida. Okay, the chapter related to knowing when to stop and when to start. And this is lines 73 to 93. And then you have at-ta'at, rules related to the ta, 94 to 100. All right, this is section 3 of the poem. Section 4 deals with the ending, and it comprises of 3 topics. The first being Hamzatul Wasl from lines 101 to 103. And then you have rulings related to stopping at the end of a word. That's lines 104 to 105. And 106 and 107 is the conclusion for this poem. All right, so that's a general overview, outline of this poem. Now, let's begin bi'idhnillahi ta'ala with the recital and the commentary. So our brother, Jazakallah khairah, let's begin reading.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولشيخنا ولمشايخه ولمسلمين أجمعين الأحياء منهم والميتين. قال الشيخ العلامة محمد بن محمد ابن الجزرية رحمه الله في نظمه المقدمة فيما على قارئ القرآن أن يعلم، أي الجزرية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يقول راجع في رب سامعي محمد بن الجزري الشافعي. الحمد لله وصلى الله على نبيه ومصطفاه محمد وآله وصحبه ومقرئ القرآن مع محبه. وبعد إن هذه مقدمة فيما على قارئه أن يعلمه، إذ واجب عليهم محتم قبل الشروع أولا أن يعلموا مخارج الحروف والصفات ليلفظوا بأفصح اللغات، محرر التجويد والمواقف وما الذي رسم في المصاحف من كل مقطوع وموصول بها وتاء أنثى لم تكن تكتب بها.
طيب أحسنت. You read every chapter and then we'll comment at the end of the chapter. طيب. So the author, rahimahullah, before we go into the actual poem, it's important for us to know, we know that every act of worship has pillars. Naam, so you think about wudu, it has pillars. Things that must be present in order for the act of worship to be completed. Likewise, salah, it has pillars. They must be present in order for the salah to be present and be valid. Sah? Likewise, tajweed, it has pillars as well. The pillars of this act of worship, one being makharij al-huruf. The first pillar of tajweed is makharij al-huruf. طيب, meaning the articulation points of the letters, and we'll expound on that later. The second being sifatul huruf, okay, or knowing the characteristics of these letters. What are the characteristics found in each of these letters? The third being ahkamu tajweed, the rulings related to tajweed, so idhar, idgham, ikhfa, the mad, ghunna, etc. The fourth being al-akhdhu mushafahatan. Al-akhdhu mushafahatan, meaning that you learn tajweed directly from a teacher. This is a pillar. Yani that you must learn tajweed from a teacher. You cannot self-teach yourself this science. And when it comes to learning tajweed, ikhwan and khawat, there are three ways you can learn tajweed. And the most complete form is when the teacher recites to you and you follow along, and then you recite to them what you've heard directly afterwards. Okay, this is the best form and the complete form of learning tajweed. The second level, okay, is when the teacher does not recite to you, but you recite to the teacher. The teacher just listens and they correct you wherever you make mistakes. This is a good method, okay? However, it's not the most ideal, because if a person never heard it or know how it's recited, then they'll make a lot of mistakes. However, in many places, like here in Saudi Arabia, this is the method usually transverse in tahfidh, in the places where they teach Quran, because the amount of students, like it's too many students. And in some places where the teacher recites first. It depends on the markaz and the halaqat. طيب. After that, the least ideal method is when the listener or the student listens on YouTube or listens to a reciter, but does not recite it. Okay? They do not recite it. And this third method is not sufficient, ikhwani akhawat. And many people find themselves in this circumstance due to the lack of accessibility to teachers. But it's not sufficient. You must recite to someone. Why? Because if you only recite based off of listening on a YouTube video or a recording or a radio, etc., then you think you're reciting it correctly when in reality you're making mistakes you don't even realize. طيب? This is why it's important to recite to somebody. And even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite being the most eloquent Arab, right? Despite him being the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself had to listen and repeat the Quran to Jibreel alayhi salam during each Ramadan. All right? Every time Quran was revealed to him, he had to recite it to Jibreel alayhi salam. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So if this is the case with the Prophet of Allah, and he's the best of mankind, and he is the most eloquent of Arabs, what about us? We have to do the same. So we have to go out and attend these circles of knowledge to learn it directly from the people of Quran. We shouldn't view this practice as a form of humiliation. There's some people who think that if they go sit down in the masjid, it's a form of humiliation. It's not really befitting of them, right? They're too shy to sit under someone who and he may not be of the same social status or financial status or even age, right? And shaitan comes to them and whispers to them, preventing them from learning the Quran. And this is a mistake. This is a mistake. Rather, you must humble yourself. You must humble yourself for the sake of Allah. You are an Abdullah at the end of the day. Humble yourself for the sake of Allah and learn under its people. So this is the fourth pillar of Tajweed, and that is learning directly under a teacher. The fifth pillar of Tajweed, and it's extremely important, is al-Riyadah. Al-Riyadah, yani practicing. You have to put it into practice. It's not sufficient to attend a 1-week course or a 2-year program, 3-year program, 4-year program, but you don't practice. No, that's not sufficient. Tajweed is a science that requires practice. And in the beginning, it will be difficult. However, with time, with practice, it becomes easier for that individual. And not only that, the person will receive rewards for their difficulty. Now, as mentioned in hadith, that the one who يَتَتَعْتَعُ فِيهِ وَعَلَيْهِ شَاقٌ لَهُ أَجْرًا. Or كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, the one who recites the Quran and he stutters in it, he finds difficulty in it, it's difficult for them to do so, that they will have 2 rewards. They will have 2 rewards. SubhanAllah. And look how the Prophet of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم encourages us to struggle in learning and how to recite the Quran. Now, طيب. With that being said, the brother Jazahullah Khair read the first 8 lines, the introduction. This poem is referred to as being an urjuza. And this is a term that refers to a poem where the last letter of the line, of each line, rhymes with the first portion of the last letter of that line. So, what I mean by that, for example, we take a look at the screen. يقول راجي عفو ربي سامعي, right? كسرة. This is known as شطر الأول or مطلع القصيدة. All right. محمد بن الجزرية الشافعي. So you see how it's كسرة at the first part and كسرة at the end, and it rhymes. This is what we refer to as urjuza. Any poem like this is referred to as urjuza. طيب. The first portion is called صدر, and the second half, right? Muhammad ibn al-Jazariyyah, this is referred to as being ajzun. These are terms you learn in arud, the science of arud. And the last letter is referred to as qafiyah. Okay, meaning the last letter of the ajz. Tamam. Summary of these 8 lines, essentially what the author does here is, of course, say the basmalah. He seeks the assistance of Allah through his names, all of his names, in writing this poem, and he specifically singles out Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. All right, and it's very important for us to understand this term. Many of us, we don't really give much attention to it, and we just simply think it means in the name of Allah, right? But what does in the name of Allah mean? What does that mean? First of all, that's not the intended meaning in the Arabic. All right, we went over this many times, but in brief, this phrase means that you're seeking Allah's assistance. You're seeking assistance in Allah's names, all of his names. Bismillahi, mufrad mudaf yufidu al-umum. All right, in all of Allah's names, and you're singling Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, dhikrul khas ba'd al-am. Okay, singling out what? Allah's mercy. So you're seeking assistance in Allah, and you're desiring his mercy in whatever affair you're doing. In this instance, he's doing this in the context of writing his poem. He's seeking Allah's assistance and his mercy in writing this poem. The author says this phrase, and then he affirms all praise due to Allah, Then he sends a salah and salam to the Prophet ﷺ as we are commanded in the Quran. Sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. This is a command from Allah. When we send salah to the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, make dua for him. As for asking Allah for his safety, then it is to protect him when he was alive, is to protect him from physical harm. But now he's not alive. So when we say sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, was intended that we protect his honor. We ask Allah to protect his honor and to protect his sharia. Naam, this is the intended meaning when you say sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then the author sends salah and salam not only to the Prophet of Allah, but also to his family, his followers, his companions. Okay? And even the reciter of the Quran. Look, he says here what? وَمُقْرِئِ الْقُرْآنِ. Subhanallah. And Zakaria al-Ansari, Shaykh al-Islam, rahimahullah, he commented on this phrase and he said, أي على مقرئ القرآن العامل به. Yani the one who acts upon it. Not just simply recite it, but what's intended is the one who acts upon it. Now, this is the intended meaning of the Quran when it's revealed. Not just simply to recite, but to implement it. Now, and he even includes in the dua, مَعْ مُحِبِّهِ, subhanAllah, and those who love them. Meaning that they themselves are not proficient in reciting the Quran. Maybe they may not even recite the Quran themselves, but they have that love for those people and they have love and reverence for the Quran. So they enter into the dua as well, subhanAllah. And this is a beautiful point that, as the Prophet of Allah, he said, Al-mar'u ma'a man ahab, that a person is with who he loves, and they'll be resurrected with the one who he loves. Subhanallah bihamdi. And this shows the importance of loving the Prophet of Allah and loving the Salaf, loving the Sahaba, loving the righteous people, loving the ulama. Even if you have not reached the status of a scholar or a righteous person, you'll be resurrected with them simply because of your love for them. Subhanallah bihamdi. And this also shows the mercy and compassion that a teacher must have to a student. Look how he makes dua for the student, muqri al-Quran, and also those who love them. This is how our deen should be, ikhwani akhwat. Our deen is based off of rifq and mercy, okay, rahmah and gentleness and compassion, okay. And our deen is not based off of harshness and ridiculing and attacking others, all right. And I'm mentioning this because we find that these attributes, sadly, are found often among Quran teachers in certain cultures. That you find in their classes, they are very harsh to their students and they beat their students and they ridicule and attack their students. And this is wrong. The best guidance, khayru hadi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The best guidance is the guidance of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he was the best Quran teacher. And him teaching the Quran, there was no harshness whatsoever. Anas ibn Malik, the servant of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, khadamtu Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam ashra sinin. I serviced him. I was his servant for 10 years, helping him in every affair, not just in the public, but also at home, privately. And he said that the Prophet of Allah, فَمَا قَالَ لِي أُفٍّ قَطْ, and he never said to me, not even one time, uff. وَمَا قَالَ لِي لِشَيْءٍ صَنَعْتُهُ لِمَا صَنَعْتَهُ, and nor did he ever say to me one time, something which I did, why did you do that? وَلَا لِشَيْءٍ تَرَكْتُهُ لِمَا تَرَكْتَهُ, or something I left off that he commanded me to do. He did not say, why did you leave it off? وَكَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ مِنْ أَحْسَنِ النَّاسِ خُلُقًا, and the Messenger of Allah he had the best character. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This is how we should teach the Quran, with these manners. Don't follow that which you learned in your culture, in your country. Do not project those methods on the people if it entails harming others and demoralizing others and attacking them and being pessimistic and beating them. No, this is not Islam. Rather, the Prophet of Allah was uplifting, and he was always someone who motivated his companions. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Bashiru wa la tunafiru." Give glad tidings and do not run the people away. Give glad tidings and do not run the people away. And the Quran teacher has to be the one who holds the most firm to the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Naam. Okay, so I want you all to pay attention to this and beware of this and teach your Quran teachers this. Everyone needs learning, and especially Quran teachers, because this is something that's apparent and rampant in many cultures, and we have to uplift, unveil this ignorance, and teach them the Sunnah in this regard. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all success. Also in this introduction, the author highlights that it's obligatory for the reciter of the Quran to first learn the makharij of the huruf and its sifat, and that it's also we must learn how or where we should stop and begin in the Quran, the Uthmani script, and how it is written and pronounced, Okay, and also the ta ta'nith, and that is written as an open ta. Those are some benefits from the introduction, and let's move on to the next chapter.
أحسن الله إليكم. في معرفة مخارج الحروف. مخارج الحروف 17 على الذي يختاره من اختبر. فآلف الجوف وأختها وهي حروف مد للهواء تنتهي. ثم لأقصى الحلق همز هاء. ثم لوسطه فعين حاء. أدناه غين خاؤها والقاف. أقصى اللسان فوق ثم الكاف. أسفل والوسط فجيم الشين يا. والضاد من حافته إذ وليا. لأضراس من أيسر أو
لا
يمناها.
دراسة لا دراسة همزة وصل لا دراسة.
أحسن الله إليكم. لضرس من أيسر أو يمناها. واللام أدناها لمنتهاها. والنون من طرفه تحت اجعلوا. والراء يناديه لظهر أدخلوا. والطاء والدال وتا منه ومن. عليا الثنايا والصفير مستكن. منه ومن فوق الثنايا السفلى. والضاء والذال وثال العليا. من طرفيهما ومن بطن الشفة. فالفاء مع أطراف الثنايا المشرفة. للشفتين الواو باب ميم. وغنة مخرجها الخيشوم.
أحسنت. A brother Suhaybi asked, does the ha in muhibbihi return back to the muqri or to the Quran? There's a principle, الضمير يعود إلى أقرب مذكور. Okay, that the dhamir refers back to the last mention, the closest mentioned thing. So muhib al-Quran. All right. It also includes the one who recites the Quran. Loving the reciter of the Quran. This is from Iman as well. Inshallah ta'ala, they are encompassed in the dua. طيب. In this set of lines, ikhwani akhawat, the author speaks about one of the pillars of tajweed that we mentioned, and that is makharij al-huruf. All right. And this is the first pillar one should learn. This is the first topic that you should learn when it comes to tajweed. You don't go straight to idhar, idgham, la. You're skipping a whole process. You first start with the letters, all right? And then later on, we'll work on how do you combine the letters, how do you pronounce it together. But the first thing you need to study is the letter by itself and how it's pronounced and where it's pronounced and what are its descriptions, all right? So the makharij huruf deals with the articulation points. Where are the letters pronounced? And before we even go into that, let us focus on how sound comes out. How does sound come out of your mouth? It starts from your lungs, okay, where you have air. If you have no air in your lungs, can you make a sound? Try it. When you're out of breath, can you make a sound? No. Right? You run, you can't speak, can't make a sound. Where does the sound come from? It comes from the air from your lungs. Everyone with me so far? So this is the origin. Then you push the air out from your lungs to your mouth. All right? Now, the position of your mouth, while that air is passing through, that will determine what sound will come out. And of course, you have sifat, other factors, but the main factor that will produce a particular sound is where you're pronouncing. And this is what's known as makharij. All right? And this is why makharij is very important to study, because it helps us to understand how to pronounce these letters. Where does it come from? All right. Ibn al-Jazariyyah, he wrote in his book An-Nashr, he said, أول ما يجب على مريد إتقان قراءة القرآن تصحيح إخراجه كل حرف من مخرجه المختص به تصحيحا. That the first obligation that's upon the one who desires to perfect the recital of the Quran, the first obligation is to what? Correct the articulation points of every letter. Ensure that each letter is pronounced in its proper place, that is specific to it. طيب? This is the first obligation, meaning that is the first thing that you study. Everyone with me so far? So for this reason, the author began with makharij over the other topics. All right? And this is important because if you make a mistake in the makharaj, ikhwan akhawat, you can completely distort the meaning of the Quran. There's two types of mistakes in tajweed. You have lahn jalil and you have lahn khafi. Lahn jalil is when you change the pronunciation of the word to the point where it affects the meaning and it gives it a bad meaning, okay? Or just changes the meaning altogether. Now, an example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرُوا إِذْ كُنْتُمْ قَلِيلًا فَكَثَّرَكُمْ فَكَثَّرَكُمْ with a tha, فَكَثَّرَكُمْ. Some people pronounce tha with a sa, seen. and they say kassarakum. This is a mistake because it changes the meaning. Instead of saying, and remember when you were all a few amount of people, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you abundantly, made you a lot. Instead of saying with a tha, they say sa, the meaning changes to, and he destroyed you. So he destroyed you. Remember when you were few in number, and then Allah destroyed you. Is that the correct meaning? Of course not. This is not the intended meaning. So you see how a letter can change the meaning of a word, and this shows the importance of learning the makharij. And this is why the author said is yajibu, that is wajibun. Yani it's obligatory, right? For us to learn al-makharij. And then many other examples. We don't really have time to go over it. But when it comes to makharij, we should know that makharij is the plural for the word makhraj. And linguistically, it means mahallul khuruj. Yani it's ism makan, and it means mahallul khuruj. It's the place of exiting. Makhraj means the place of exiting. All right? In tajweed, what's intended is mahallu khuruj al-harf. Yani the place in which the harf exits from. All right? And scholars differ as to how many makharij there are in the Arabic language. The author, rahimahullah, he takes the position of there being 17 points, 17 articulation points. And al-Khalil al-Farahidi, يعني from the imams of Lugha, النواضع من جميع علوم في اللغة العربية, they took the position that is 17 points. And we should know that when the author says 17 points, he's speaking about the points in terms of detail. Yani he's more specific. Yani he's highlighting each point. However, these 17 points, those makharij that are khasa, they can be categorized into a more general, overall, arching category, and that's what's referred to as makharij al-amma. Okay, a general articulation points. These 17 detailed points can be categorized into 5 general points. Okay, and it's important to notice so you have a better picture of what the author is saying here. Because if you take a look at 17, it may be daunting, but if you take a look at 5, it's much easier. The makharij, the 5 major or general makharij in your mouth, okay, and that which surrounds it, are 5. And they are 1 being the jawf, okay, and in this area there's 1 makhraj for 3 letters. They're referred to as al-huruf al-jawfiyya or hawa'iyya, and they are hamza, waw, and ya, or alif, waw, and ya. Then you have the lisan, the tongue, and this has the most makharij. This has 10 different makharij. And from the tongue, you're able to pronounce 18 different letters in the Arabic language. And then you have the halq, okay, the throat area. And in the throat area, there's 3 different makharij, in which 6 letters are present. Al-huruf al-halqiyya, yani huruf al-izhar if you want to be more specific. And then you have shafatan, your 2 lips. And on your lips, there are 2 different makharij points. These are known as al-huruf al-shafawiyya. They're found under these 2 makharajan. And then you have the last makharaj is the khayshum. And this is the makharaj for the gunna, where you pronounce gunna in your khayshum area. Once again, this is just a commentary. We're not going to go into detail, but this is to give you an overview. There are 5 major makharij in your mouth and that which surrounds it. طيب. Under those 5 categories, you have how many? According to Ibn al-Jazari, those 5 general can be broken down to how many specific categories? 17. Ahsantum, right? He said 17. All right. Everyone with me so far? Is that clear? طيب. Now that we mentioned the general rulings, 5 areas where the letter is pronounced in your mouth, does that suffice us? Can we start reciting Arabic and reading Arabic correctly? No, it does not suffice. Now you need to learn the description and characteristics of those letters so as to differentiate between one letter from the other, right? Some letters can have the same makhraj. They come from the same area, but they have different descriptions, which changes the way it sounds, okay? And this, like, for example, ta and ta, sad and sin. They come from the same area, respectively. However, they sound totally different. Naam, this is where fi sifat al-huruf, the concept of sifat comes into play. You have to know what are the characteristics of those letters to help you distinguish between each letter in the makhraj. And every letter in the Arabic language, ikhwani akhawat, it contains at least 5 of the descriptions that the author mentions in this chapter, the upcoming chapter. All right? Every letter has to have at least 5. But there's some letters that have more. Some letters have 6 of these descriptions. Some have 7. But the very least is 5 of these descriptions. All right? The details of them, we cannot go over it in this class. That's shadid. But they're very important. All right? So begin, my brother. You can begin reading it.
أحسن الله إليكم. في صفات الحروف: صفاتها جهر ورق مستفل منفتح مصمتة وضد كل مهموسها فحثه شخص سكت شديدها لفظ أجد قط بكت وبين الرخ والشديد لنعمر وسبع علب خص ضغط قذ حصر وصاد ضاد طاء ضاء مطبقة وفر من لب الحروف المذلقة صفيرها صاد وزاي سين قلقلة قطب جد واللين واو ويان سكنا وانفتح قبلهما والانحراف صحها في اللام والراء وبالتكرير جعل وبالتفشي الشين ضاد استطل
ضاد نستطل نون ضاد نستطل
وللتفشي أحسن عليكم وللتفشي الشين ضاد نستطل.
نعم أحسنت بارك الله فيك. Because tanween, and we'll learn later on, inshallah ta'ala, is basically a nun za'ida. Tanween, when you say an, in, it's a nun that's pronounced, but it's not written. طيب. So now we go into the chapter of sifat, and this is the other pillar. If you all recall, we mentioned 5 pillars of tajweed. This is the second pillar of tajweed. And the sifat, the categories of sifat are broken down into 2 major categories. One, you have that which is referred to as being al-mutadaddah, and in it are 10 different types. And then you have غير المتضادة, that which are non-opposites. Mutadaddah means opposites. The words in the opposites, we'll see, they're opposite to one another. And there are 10 different descriptions under this category. As for the non-opposites, غير المتضادة, there are 7 descriptions found in this category. So in all, the sifat al-huruf amount to 17 different descriptions. Each letter in the Arabic language must have at least how many descriptions, ikhwani akhawat? At least 5 or 6, right? Some have 6 or some have 7, but the least amount is 5. All right. So the author here, I'll give you a summary what he mentions. He mentions al-hams wal-jahr. These are opposite to one another. All right. And each of these have sentences where it gathers the letters together. For example, al-hams, they are the letters that are gathered in the sentence. فَحَثَّهُ شَخْصٌ سَكَتْ. فَحَثَّهُ شَخْصٌ سَكَتْ. Okay. So each letter in that sentence are the letters of hams. All right. And the opposite of hams is the jahr. Wallahi, ikhwan, we don't have time. I want to go in detail, but I mean, look at the time right now. Only 3 more minutes. May Allah help us all. طيب. Then we have shidda and rukhwa. All right. And then you have al-isti'la and al-istifal. Now, I do want to highlight, there's a beautiful point regarding al-isti'la. And they are the words the author said here, khussa daqtin qid. Okay. Khussa daqtin qid. The meaning of isti'la in the Arabic language, it means superiority, to transcend, to overcome, to raise, or to be raised in a lofty position. This is the meaning of al-isti'la. Now, the letters of that phrase, okay, that fall under this category of sifa, kha, sad, dad, ghain, ta, qaf, and va, this sentence has a meaning to it. Yani the meaning here is قذ خص ضغط. All right. Yani اتخذ خص ضغط. Take a home of sugarcane whenever you become poor and needy in this worldly life. Meaning live a humble life. Whenever times become hard, live a humble life. And don't depend on others. Don't humiliate yourself and present yourself in need of others. Okay. Rather live a humble life. And if you do so, you'll be raised over the people. It's a beautiful connection because the word isti'la means to be raised and be in a lofty position, yani superiority, to transcend. So if you abide by this meaning of qussa daqtin qidh, Yani you are uplifting yourself and you're transcending and you're not in need of the people. You're raising yourself above others before Allah Azza wa Jalla. Now, al-muhim, al-isti'la essentially is when you're raising your tongue to al-hanak al-a'la. This is why we refer to as al-isti'la. طيب. Ibn al-Jazari, he said in al-Nashr that these letters are huruf al-tafkhim ala al-sawab. These are the letters of al-tafkhim. And al-tafkhim of the various letters, levels, I should say, maratib. طيب. Another category of صفات الحروف that are متضادة الانفتاح and al-itbaq. Itbaq, I'm sure you all know, is صاد, ضاد, طاء, and ظاء. Then you have al-ismat and idlaq. Right? Idlaq is what he said here. Where is it? Naam, farra min lub. Okay, this is known as idlaq. And then, so those are the 10 that are opposite to one another, 10 descriptions that are opposite to one another. So a word can take either or, but it cannot take both. It cannot take both. A letter can take either or, but cannot take both. So a letter could be hams, mahmuz, okay? But it can't be mahmuz and majhur. It has to be one or the other. All right? Then you have non-opposites, the 7 characteristics. Al-inhiraf. Al-inhiraf in the letters lam and ra. You have al-safir, sad, zay, and sin. Al-qalqala, right? Qutbun jid. Takrir, ra, al-lin, waw and ya. Tafashi, shin, al-istitala, yani dad. طيب. Let's go on to the next chapter. Do you all mind if we just go over a little bit, maybe 20 more minutes, inshallah ta'ala? Barakallah fiqh. Someone said you could take 20 days. Barakallah fiqh. طيب, خلاص. Inshallah, we'll continue for 20 minutes. And if you're unable to stick around, then you can watch the recording. No problem. Barakallah fiqhum. نعم, تفضل حبيبي.
أحسن عليكم شيخ. في التجويد والأخذ بالتجويد حتم لازم من لم يصحح القرآن آثم لأنه به الإله أنزل وهكذا منه إلينا وصل وهو أيضا حلية التلاوة وزينة الأداء وراء وهو إعطاء الحروف حقها من صفة لها ومستحقها ورد كل واحد لأصلها واللفظ في نظيره كمثله.
نعم.
ورد كل واحد لأصله واللفظ في نظيره كمثله.
Okay, طيب.
مكملا من
حسبك. A quick question for everyone. Why does this have to be لأصله and not لأصلها? Right? Because the poem is a what? It's an urjuza. Naam? Ahsantum. Urjuza, right? So this line is not connected to this first shatr is not connected to the last line of the previous bait. Rather, it's an independent one. So this is why it's not ha. And this is what makes urjuza facilitates memorization. And this is why many scholars, when they write poems, they decide to write it in this fashion. There are different ways of they write poems. This is one method. نعم, تفضل أخي.
مكملا من غير ما تكلف باللطف في النطق وبلا تعسف وليس بينه وبين تركه إلا رياضة امرئ بفكه.
نعم, أحسنت. طيب. The next topic the author goes over is a tajweed. And we said tajweed is from the pillars of a tajweed, right? This is one of the pillars of tajweed. This is the third pillar. The first being makharij al-huruf. The third being sifat al-huruf. Now a tajweed. All right? And a tajweed linguistically, it means a tahseen, to make better, to perfect. Ibn al-Jazari, he mentions a tajweedu intiha'ul ghayati في إتقانه وبلوغ النهاية في تحسينه. That essentially tajweed is the ultimate goal in mastery. And it's the epitome in perfection. So when you're making tajweed of the Quran, you're trying to recite it in the most perfect manner. All right? Tajweed in the science, it is تلاوة القرآن بإعطاء كل حرف حقه من مخرجه وصفته. Essentially, tilawah of the Quran, right? Tajweed is tilawah of the Quran by giving each letter its deserving rights, by giving each letter its rights, its due rights, from its makhraj as well as its sifa. So you see the tasalsul, yani why you have to study makhraj first, and then you learn the sifa, and then once you're able to combine the makhraj and sifa, that's when you can recite with tajweed. Does that make sense? طيب. The levels of tajweed, ikhwani akhwat, are three. The first level is that which is referred to as being at-tartil. And at-tartil is essentially tu'adah. Yani when you are deliberate in your recital, when you're careful, when you're unhurried, when you try to give every letter its right without rushing. Okay? And you find that among the qura, right, from the imams of qira'at in the past, those who made this their main madhab, the main method of recital, was Warsh, was Asim, was Hamza. Okay, these are imams of qira'at. They would recite their qira'ah with a tartil, and they were known for this. Okay, and when they would teach people, it would be in this manner. All right. The second level of tajweed is that which is referred to as being al-hadar. Al-hadar. And al-hadar means to hasten, al-isra', to recite fast. You ever write after the class, inshallah ta'ala, write in YouTube, hadar Surah al-Baqarah. You'll see that Surah al-Baqarah is recited in maybe 45 minutes. SubhanAllah. Why? Because they're hastening in their recital. And this is permissible so long as there's no lahan jali, okay? That there's no change in the meaning of the words, all right? In the meanings of the words. And you find that from the imams of the qira'at who would practice this often is Ibn Kathir, not Ibn Kathir the Mufassir, but rather this is Ibn Kathir al-Makki. Yani he was a famous qari during the early periods of Islam. All right, his name also Ibn Kathir. All right, Ibn Kathir, the one that we know, who's later on. He's from the students of Ibn Taymiyyah, later on. This Ibn Kathir al-Makki is from early on, from the Imams of Qira'at. He would practice this hadar. Also Abu Amr, also Qalun. They would practice this mode of recital or tajweed. And then you have that which is referred to as being a tadwir. A tadwir. And that is a combination between both, meaning that it's not too slow, nor is it too fast. Rather, it's in the middle. And this is the method that was preferred by Ibn Amir and al-Kisa'i in their qira'at. All right. All three of these levels were performed by all imams, and they all saw it to be permissible. However, what we mentioned is that which they perform the most in their recital. All right. Now, and there are other benefits of tajweed. We don't really have time to go over it. So let's move on to the next chapter. تفضل أخي.
أحسن الله إليكم. في الترقيقات: فرققا مستفلا من أحرف وحاذرا تفخيم اللفظ الألف وهمزة الحمد أعوذ اهدنا الله ثم اللام لله لنا وليتلطف وعلى الله ولض والميم من مخمصة ومن مرض وباء برق باطل بهم بذي واحرص على الشدة والجهر الذي فيها وفي الجيم كحب الصبر ربوة تث وشيخ
نعم ربوة نج وربوة نج تثت
ربوة نج تثت ربوة نج تثت وحج الفجر وبينا وحج الفجر
نعم
وبينا مقلقلا إن سكن وإن يكن في الوقف كان أبينا وحاء حصحص أحط الحق وحاء حصحص أحط الحق وسين مستقيم يسقو
قاف
وسين مستقيم يسقو.
نعم أحسنت بارك الله فيك. طيب خيرا. This chapter, the sub-chapter, deals with a tarqiqat. In some nusakh, it mentions a tanbihat, meaning some affairs you have to pay close attention to. Due to lack of time, we'll skip any commentary regarding it because it requires details. Let's go on to Ra. The next section of the book, from lines 41 to 64, deals with ar-ra'at, rulings related to Ra, as well as lam, as well as dad and dha, and noon, meme with shadda and meme sakina. So let's continue to read. تفضل.
أحسن الله إليكم. في الراءات: ورقق الراء إذا ما كسرت كذاك بعد الكسر حيث سكنت إن لم تكن من قبل حرف استعلاء أو كانت الكسرة ليست أصلا والخلف في فرق لكسر يوجد وأخفي تكريرا إذا تشدد.
نعم واصل.
في اللامات وفخم اللام من اسم الله عن فتح أو ضم كعبد الله. في التحذيرات وحرف استعلام فخم مخصوصا
طيب he said
لإطباق
ka
أقوى.
جزاك الله خير. He said ka Abdullahi. Normally in Arabic we would say what? Ka Abdillahi, صح? But why in this instance he said Abdullahi instead of Abdillahi? نعم الحكاية من باب لا ليس من باب الحكاية. Poetry doesn't follow the rules. Good, that's one reason. Because the ruling of lam changes, right? Here he's highlighting what? عن فتح أو ضم. When there's a fatha or a dhamma before the lam, right? If he said Abdillahi and he followed the rules of Nahu, then this would not be a good example, right? Right now he wants to give an example for when there's a fatha or a dhamma before the lam. Everyone understand? So he says ka space Abdullahi. نعم تفضل.
السلام عليكم. التحذيرات وحرف الاستعلاء فخ مخصوصا لإطباق أقوى نحو قال والعصا. وبين الإطباق من أحط مع بسط والخلف به بنخلقكم وقع. واحرص على السكون في جعلنا أنعمت والمغضوب مع ضللنا. وخلص انفتاح محذورا عسى خوف اشتباهه بمحذور عصا. وراعي شدة بكاف وبتا كشرككم وتتوف كشرككم
نعم.
وتتوفاش فتنة. نعم. وأول مثل وجنس إن سكن وأول مثل وجنس إن سكن
نعم
اضم
وأولي
كقل ربي وأول مثل وجنس إن سكن
نعم including two
أضم كقل ربي.
متماثلين ومتجانسين. That's why it's وأولي يعني include متجانسين and متماثلين. نعم.
وأول مثل وجنس إن سكن أضم كقل ربي وبل وأب في يوم مع قال وقل نعم سبحه لا تزغ قلوب فالتقم.
نعم
في
واصل.
الضاءات والضاء باستطالة ومخرج ميز من الضاء وكلها تجي. في الضعن ظل الظهر عظم الحفظ أيقظ وأنظر عظم ظهر اللفظ. ظاهر لظى شواذ كظم ظلما أغلظ ظلام ظهر انتظر ظما. أظفر
ظفرين
ظنا كيف جاء
ظفرين.
أغلظ ظلام ظفر انتظر ظما.
نعم.
أظفر ظنا كيف جاء أظفر ظنا كيف جاء وعظ سوى عضين ظل النحل ذخرف سوى.
زخرف
ظلتم
زخرف.
عضين ظل النحل زخرف سوى.
لا بدون واو.
وظلت
عيدين ظل النحل زخرف سوا.
عضين ظل النحل زخرف سوى.
نعم أحسنت.
ظلتم وبروم ظلوا كالحجر ظلت الشعراء نظلوا. يظلن محظورا مع المحتضر وكنت فظا وجميع النظر إلا بويل حل وأولى ناظرة والغيظ للرعد وهود قاصرة. والحظ للحظ على الطعام وفي ظنين الخلاف سامي. وإن تلاقيا البيان لازم أنقض ظهرك يعض الظالم واضطر مع وأضط مع أفطم وصفها جباههم عليهم وأظهر الغنة من نون ومن وأظهر الغنة من نون ومن ميم إذا ما شدد وأخيا الميم إن تسكن بغنة لدى باء على المختار من أهل الأداء وأظهرنها عند باقي الأحرف واحذر لدى واو وفاء تختفي في معنى النون الساكنة والتنوين وحكم تنوين ونون يلفى إظهار إدغام وقلب إخفاء فعند حرف الحلق أظهر وادغم اللام والراء لا بغنة لزم وأدغما بغنة في يؤمن إلا بكلمة كدنيا عنوان والقلب عند الباء بغنة كذا الإخفاء لدى باقي الحروف أخذ
نعم. So this ruling here, أحكام النون
المادة.
الساكنة والتنوين, it deals with the pronunciation of words when they're put together. Okay? And this is what you study in Tajwid. But once again, if you don't perfect each letter by itself, then you're unable to pronounce letters when they're put together. All right? And the main rulings as relates to Ahkam al-Nun al-Sakina with Tanween are four, as you all are aware of. You have al-Idhar, you have al-Idgham, you have al-Iqlab, and you have al-Ikhfa. And each of them have their details and their letters. نعم تفضل.
أحسن عليك. في المادات والمد لازم وواجب أتى وجائز وهو وقص ثبت فلازم إن جاء بعد حرف مد ساكن حالين وبالطول يمد وواجب إن جاء قبل همزة متصلا إن جمع بكلمة وجائز إذا أتى منفصلا أو عرض السكون وفقا مسجلا في
نعم.
الوقوف.
This is Ahkam al-Mad, and they're broken down into three major categories. You have al-luzum, al-wujub, and al-jawaz, and they are broken down into further subcategories. نعم تفضل.
عفوا الله. في الوقوف وبعد تجويدك للحروف لابد من معرفة الوقوف والابتداء وهي تقسم إذن ثلاثة تام وكاف وحسن وهي لما تم فإن لم يوجد تعلق أو كان معنى فابتدي فالتام فالكاف ولفظا فامنعا إلا رؤوس الآي جوز فالحسن وغير ما تم قبيح وله الوقف مضطرا ويبدأ قبله وليس في القرآن من وقف وجب ولا حرام غير ما له سبب.
نعم حسبك. نعم, this is the science of علم الوقف والابتداء. يعني knowing when to stop and when to start. And this is extremely important because it can have an impact on the meaning of the Quran and change it completely. All right. For this reason, you find that if you take a look at your mushaf, at the end of the mushaf, at the back of the mushaf, after or before the table of contents, there are actually rules of the rasm, of the symbols for stopping and going. Okay. And it's important for you to memorize it because, like I said, it can change and alter the meaning. There's a difference between al-waqf and as-sakt. These are two terms you're going to learn, and al-qata'. These are terms you'll learn, inshallah ta'ala, in the science. Al-waqf is essentially when you stop, okay, you cut off the sound on a word for a period of time. You take a breath in a normal manner. While as-sakt is when you stop in pronouncing the letter, but you don't take a breath. And as I mentioned earlier, when Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was asked about what is the meaning of warattil al-Quran tartila, he mentioned that ma'rifat al-wuquf is the second half, right? He said at-tartil tajweed al-huruf, performing tajweed on the huruf, and wa ma'rifat al-wuquf, showing that these are two pillars of tartil, yani knowing tajweed and knowing when to start and stop. تفضل أخي.
الله عنك. في المقطوع والموصول وعرف لمقطوع وموصول وتا في المصحف الإمامي فيما قد أتى فاقضع ب10 كلمات ألا ملجأ ولا إله إلا وتعبد ياسين ثاني هدى لا يشركن تشرك يدخلا تعلو على ألا يقول لا أقول إنما بالرعد والمفتوح صل وعنما اقطعوا مما بروم والنساء خلف المنافقين
نعم. Go
أمن
back. نعم. 83.
اقطعوا مما بروم والنساء خلف المنافقين أمن أسسا
نعم أحسنت.
فصلت النساء وذبح حيثما وألم المفتوح كسر إنما لنعام والمفتوح يدعون معا وخلف الأنفال ونحل وقعا وكل ما سألتموه واختلف ردوا كذا قل بئس ما والوصل صف خلفتموني واشتروا في مقطع أوحي أفضتم أوحي أفضم اشتهت يبدو معا ثاني فعلنا وقعت رمنكلا تنزيل ظلة وغيرها صلة فأينما كالنحل صل ومختلف في الشعراء في الشعراء الأحزاب والنساء وصل فإن لم هود ألا نجمع كي لا تحزنوا تأسوا على حج عليك حرج وقطعهم عن ما يشاء من تولى يومهم وما لهذا والذين هؤلاء تحين في الإمام صل ووهلا ووزنهم وكالوهم صل
ووزنوهم
كذا من
ووزنوهم
ووزنوهم وكالوهم صلي كذا من الوهاويا لا تفصلي في التاءات ورحمة الزخرف بالتاز زبرة لعراف روم هود كاف البقرة نعمتها ثلاث نحل إبرهم معا أخيرة عقود الثاني هم لقمان ثم فاطر كالطور عمران لعنة بها والنور وامرأة يوسف عمران القصص تحريم معصية بقد سمع يخص شجرة الدخان شجرة الدخان سنة فاطري كلا والأنفال وأخرى غافري قرة عين جنة في وقعت فطرة بقية وابنة وكلمة أوسط الأعراف وكل ما اختلف جمعا وفردا فيه بالتاء عرف.
حسبك. Jazakallah khair. Now, this chapter will speak about examples of when the ta, when it's usually supposed to be marbuta or ta ta'nif, all right, when it's supposed to be closed, but instead it's written open. Instead, it is written open. These are examples in the Quran when the ta marbuta or ta ta'nif is now open, maftuha, all right? And the reason why it's done so, ikhwan akhawat, the Rasam of the Uthmani script is written in the way it's written so as to accept all other acceptable qira'ats. Okay, qira'at, we have a whole entire course regarding the subject. Yani, essentially are revealed methods of reciting the Quran. طيب? And it's written in this manner so as to accept that qira'ah. طيب? Now, you find some people who, mashallah, they're very eager to show people the beauty of the Quran. So they start to make up stuff, things that make sense to them, but has no basis in the Sharia nor from the aqwal of the Salaf. An example of this is that they say sometimes you see in the Quran, rahmah, written with a closed ta, and sometimes you find it with an open ta. And when you find it with the open ta, that means that Allah's rahmah is vast. But this has no basis, ikhwan akhwat. Anyone who gives a tafsir like this, the reason why it's open here, not here, or written like this, not like that, and they give a tafsir for it, know that it is batil, unless they bring evidence. Unless they bring evidence from the Quran or Sunnah, aqwal of the Salaf al-Ummah, or Lugha Arabiya. That's the only sources for tafsir, ikhwan akhwat. طيب. Anything else is considered to be tahakkum, ijtihad biduni dalil. It's only their thoughts and what they think. All right? This is an important point to note, that tafsir only comes from Quran, Sunnah, aqwal al-Salaf, Arabic language. That's it. Everyone with me? Is this clear? طيب, تفضل أخي. And this ends the third section of this poem that we mentioned in the beginning of the class. Now we move on to the last section of the poem, and it only consists of about 6 lines or so. تفضل. Or 5.
أحسن الله إليكم. في همزات الوصل. وابدأ بهمز الوصل من فعل بضم إن كان ثالث من الفعل يضم واكسره حال الكسر والفتح وفي الأسماء غير اللام كسرها وفي ابن مع ابنة مع ابنة امرئ ابن مع ابنة امرئ واثنين وامرأة واسم مع اثنتين في الوقف على أواخر الكلم وحاذر الوقف بكل الحركة إلا إذا رمت فبعض الحركة إلا بفتح أو بنصب وأشم إشارة بالضم في رفع وضم.
نعم أحسنت.
خاتمة.
طيب, in this chapter the author mentions a few different important mustalahat, and the one being al-ishmam as well as al-rom. And essentially the difference between these two terms is that al-rom is when you pronounce some of the harakah. When it has a kasra or dhamma on it, you pronounce some of the harakah, okay, but not all of it. All right. While ishmam, there's no salt. While you point to it, you indicate to the harakah, you indicate to it. Okay, you indicate to it. Now, and this requires I need to watch a video to show you exactly the mouth, how it should be for both instances. But just take note of this, put it in your notes, type in YouTube how to pronounce these two terms, and you will find Surah Yusuf. تفضل أخي.
أحسن الله إليكم. خاتمة. وقد تقضى نظمي المقدمة مني لقارئ القرآن تقدمة والحمد لله لها ختام ثم الصلاة بعد والسلام.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And with that, alhamdulillah, we've completed the reading of this wonderful poem. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it from us all and to make it a means for us to enter Jannah Firdaus A'la bi ghayri hisab wa la azab, the highest abode in Jannah without any punishment nor reckoning. And just as I've received ijazat from my shaykh in this poem, minhum, among them is Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Qasim, hafidhahullah ta'ala. Among them is Shaykh Abdul Rahim al-Eidi. Among them is Shaykh Ahmed al-Tum and others, hafidhahumullah wa rahimahum man mat. I grant you all a connected chain back to the author of this poem, and I advise everyone to have and to observe taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jalla in this affair and all of your affairs in secret and in private, to abide to the authentic sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ under the understanding of the Sahaba, and to realize that this is just a means in achieving Jannah, and this is not the end goal. Ijazat are not the end goal. This is not considered to be something that we should chase after and suffice with that. La. Rather, this is only a means to help us have a closer connection with the text so that we can memorize it and understand it and implement it and teach it to others. طيب? And the ultimate goal is to learn the contents and implement the contents so that it could be a proof for us on a day of judgment. Nah, man, we should not use this as a means of showing off to others, nor should we use it as a means to show that we are better than others. La, this is not the intent of that. And anyone who's afflicted with that, then the ijazat become a proof against that person and not for him on a day of judgment or her. May Allah protect us all from riya and sum'ah and arrogance and from the amrad al-qulub, the sicknesses of the hearts. May Allah purify our hearts. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the dhikr of Allah moist on our tongues. Wallahu ta'ala alam. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والله تعالى أعلم وبارك الله فيكم وجزاكم الله خيرا.